All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Natalie Sonnen, and I am the Executive Director of LifeCanada. LifeCanada is Canada's national educational pro-life organization. We are a national association of 50 to 70 local and provincial member groups. Though we're not a religious organization, we're a non-denominational and non-sectarian organization that educates the public on the dignity of human life. We do welcome the religious perspective to the table because we believe that the teachings of the world religions have much to say about the nature and dignity of the human person. So that is why we have here today Father Shenan Boquet. I hope I said that correctly. And he is the president of Human Life International. Father Boquet travels around the world spreading the gospel of life as president of Human Life International. I'm a huge fan of Human Life International, Father, and the work that you do. I think it's exceptional. Father Boquet was ordained in 1993 and is a priest of the Catholic Archdiocese in Louisiana, his home state, where he served there before joining Human Life International in August of 2011. He has journeyed over 1 million miles to 87 countries, I think you said, Father,
Yes.
and collaborates with church leaders, mentors, priests, and seminarians, offers guidance to civil leaders, speaks at numerous international conferences, and spreads the Catholic Church's teaching on life and family as part of HLI's global mission to build a culture of life. So I'm looking forward to hearing about your travels, Father, and welcome. And I'm going to just let you jump right in here and go right on ahead.
Well, very good. Well, Natalie, thank you very, very much. And it's great to be with you and to be with our audience tonight. And I'm so grateful to everybody that's joined us in this little brief moment to really talk about, I really think, a very important subject. And I know that much of our audience shares our love and our passion for life, for family, and is recognizing not only in the United States, but this conversation is a global conversation, and it's one that really transcends, so many issues in our world. And what I mean by that simply is that oftentimes we are accused at HLI of this is a Catholic issue, but as you said so beautifully in your opening, this really involves all of us, whether our faith be Christian, non-Christian, whether we recognize any particular faith at all. We can all come to an agreement and an understanding that life must be protected at all levels. And the challenge really is to build that conversation, whether that be within the religious sphere or whether that be within the civil conversation. And the privilege of serving this organization, this apostolate, has brought me into places, Natalie, that I never really thought that I would ever be. And as we were saying prior to going live, in our audience may or may not be aware of Human Life International's history, but we've been around for nearly 50 years, and so much of our work and action has been on an international scene. And we have had the joy of working in 162 countries. And in that joy of working with people, just like many members of our audience tonight, who have been very passionately involved in promoting the culture of life, protecting the family. So what I want to do tonight really is talk about a subject that's very dear to my own heart. And as I go through some of these slides that I'll share with you this evening, I want to talk about a few stories. And so the subject that I've chosen for our conversation is a conversation that really begins with the beauty of recognizing the importance of bringing that message of life to all the world. And how we start that really is, it's a starting point where we can look at the issue is whatever happens to my brother or my sister happens or to me as well. So I think if our audience can kind of just put this into their mind, And the reason why I think this is a fundamental issue is because so many people have lost sight of the not only the compassion, the sympathy, the empathy that we have for our brothers and sisters, but we've lost a sense that we are brothers and sisters. And the beautiful passage of the Good Samaritan teaches us such a beautiful teaching about what it means to reach out to our brothers and sisters, what it means to recognize a brother or sister, what it means to be aware of a brother and sister. And as we know, in so many cases, the cry of our brothers and sisters, resonates around the world on different levels, whether it be from religious persecution, whether it be from political systems that people are struggling with, or whether it be, with the most pronounced violence against human life, and that is the crime and violence of abortion that has really enveloped our world. And so we have to help people to once again, understand what it means to love and respect and defend and serve human life. And to do that, we have to reteach it. And I know as a young boy growing up in South Louisiana, we were taught in our very large family of being aware of our brothers and sisters, not just in our family, but the neighbors, the people we in our community, not only in our faith community, but the people we met in school. And I remember having this just indoctrinated into me that, be aware of how you treat other people and treat other people as you yourself would wish to be treated. And this golden rule is so important to reteach people today. So, all of us, who are listening, at least the majority, I hope, are familiar with Matthew's Gospel 25. When whatever you did for one of the least of my brothers of mine, you did for me. And this is the part that we have to help people to reclaim. Now, one of the ways that I often do this, and we couldn't do it tonight, so I apologize to our listeners, but I'm going to encourage you. There is a wonderful program called that's you can look on YouTube and other sources. It's called Sing a Little Louder. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. If you are not, I am going to strongly encourage you after maybe my presentation tonight, and is to take a little time and to really watch this beautiful video. And it's called Sing a Little Louder. And reason for it, as you will see in the presentation, that here in this little church in Germany, this gentleman now, an older man, is looking back when he was a young boy. And every week during their services, the train would pass behind the church. And of course, the train in this time was often filled with people being brought to concentration camps. And what the young man remembers is that oftentimes when the train was passing and the noise was raising and the cries of people from inside, they would just sing a little louder. They would play the organ a little louder. The voices would climb a little louder. And as you'll see, if those of you who take the time to watch the video, you'll realize that this day the train stops. And the cries of our brothers and sisters, inside of those cattle cars is so loud that it drowns out the pastor who's trying to preach, and the people are distracted by the cries and both of young, of women, of men. And this little boy is sitting with his mom and dad, and he hears all this. And just like everyone else around him, he's concerned. And so as everything moves forward, the pastor who was unable to give out his sermon, steps away from the pulpit and makes his way down and grabs a hymnal, and he begins to sing. And as he sings, others join in, and eventually the choir joins in, the organ plays, the people begin to drown out the voices of those outside. And during this moment, the young boy makes his way outside, and he comes face to face. And the picture that you see is of a cattle car, and looking out from that cattle car is a young woman. And he begins not to have a conversation because he is just moved with so much emotion, but she just begins to try to talk to him. But the whole point of, as those of you who will take that time to watch, it really just resonates with us today with regard to the conversation about abortion, or whether we're talking about the issue of euthanasia, or we're talking about other assaults on human life. That, we have to recognize the young man asks a question, and the quote at the bottom is one that comes directly from the video. And now an older man, years have passed and no one talks about it much anymore, but I still hear that train whistle in my sleep. I can still hear them crying out for help. God forgive us, forgive all of us who called ourselves Christians, yet did nothing to intervene. I really believe it's a great quote. And, you know, in the same quote that we saw in Matthew 25, whatever you do unto the least of my people, you do unto me. It's a great reminder that the care that I have for my brother, my sister, my neighbor is not just to my family and friends and to my inner sanctum. It is to every human being. And that's why when I said earlier that this is a human issue, this violence against the dignity of life from inside the womb into our world is a violence that all of us should be concerned about, and every voice should be of great concern. And how we as a people, you know, stand up and let not only our voices be heard, but that our voices also take action, take a sense of accountability in the public sphere, and to help people to retune, if you will, to tune their ears, to tune their minds, to tune their hearts, that again, whatever happens, and I'll put an image in front of our listeners, if you can visualize with me. Imagine with me that if I can put your hand, so just kind of pretend this is your hand here that I'm placing for you to see, and I have a 5-pound hammer in this other hand, and I come down on this hand with all my force, all the energy I can muster, and I come down on that hand, the excruciating pain that it will cause. If every one of you listening to my voice right now would feel that exact pain, this is what we're talking about. And this is what so many in our world have lost a sensitivity toward. And people have justified, you know, their indifference or their lack of concern. And this is what I think our challenge is today, is to stir it up, to call people not to sing a little louder, to sing louder than the voices of the cries of God's people or the cries of our brothers and sisters, but instead our voices should rise to their defense, our voices. And that's what the older gentleman was looking back, realizing that we should have done something. And of course, that day, that little boy couldn't have done anything against the German soldiers, you know, with all their weapons. But that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about, you know, what do we do as a people, you know, especially in Germany during this time, the great genocide of the Jewish people and many others. And, you know, today, what is happening to the most vulnerable, the most weak of our culture. And yet so many people do nothing. Their voices are silent. It's basically the noise of the world sings louder than the voices that they should be hearing. So it's good for us, and especially as a Christian people, you know, to realize that and I'm using scripture here, Mark 4, it's a great little reflection for myself, especially in the work and apostle that I do, to realize that, you know, by myself, I'm one, but, you know, it's trusting God. And, you know, and as I said earlier, I've been to 87 countries, and I have found myself in the company of kings, of parliamentarians, prime ministers. I've given lectures to congresses in different countries. I have stood in places that I never, ever thought I would ever find myself. And I have to tell you, honestly, it is intimidating sometimes to be there, to stand in the face of people who are on this public platform and that the world sees on different stages, and especially in the media. And here I am in their company, sitting in their office or standing with them. As I have done at the United Nations, I've given presentations there, and I'm amazed, you know, but I always ask the Lord, take the little I bring, and you, like that wonderful mustard seed, make it grow. Produce the fruit that you want it to be. And I always think of the words of St. Paul, is, you know, it's when I'm weak that I'm made strong. It's that the Lord makes me strong. And so are the words of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah says, I'm too young, and the Lord says, don't worry. Or Moses, when he says, what am I going to say? How am I going to speak? You know, the Lord gives us strength, and grace gives us strength, and truth gives us strength to be able to go out and to bear witness And I will tell you, it is an indeed amazement when I've walked out of some of these environments, and particularly like at the United Nations, where I've given presentations on human trafficking. I've given presentations on the support and dignity of the family. I've given presentations most recently in a Congress in another country, and it was amazing, to stand in the middle of all these people representing their various constituents and giving them a call, a beck and call to defend human life. So it really is a humbling work, but the Lord indeed makes us strong. So tonight, as we take this all in and we realize that, how do we reclaim a language about life? How do we reclaim, what is needed in order to build what John Paul II called the culture of life? How do we build a conversation, what he called a great campaign in the support of life? How do we build? Well, let's be honest, we are all who are listening, and myself who is involved, we are all part of this great campaign. And many of us have been in this for many years. Some of you might be listening, maybe in it for much longer than myself. And I indeed, that this carrying this campaign is something that we all need to not only for ourselves, but invite others into. And so how do we do that? Well, I'm going to use another quote. And this is not a quote from our Lord. It's not a quote from any, in a sense of a religious nature. It's actually taken from a man that many people know as Saul Alinsky. And he's not the originator of the phrase, but he is one who has perpetuated it along with many others. He who controls the language controls the mind and the heart of a nation. So I want you to think with me. He who controls the language controls the mind and the heart of a nation. So for example, when someone uses the term pre-embryo, the first thing for all of us who are listening, our ears should rise and say, false. That's a false statement. And embryologists have said this very clearly, but yet this language remains. So how do we change how people hear, what people hear, when people say it's my body, or when people say, who am I, to get involved? It doesn't involve me. Whatever happens to my brother or my sister happens to me. So it does involve all of us. And this is why it's important to take back the language. It's important to really speak the language that needs to be spoken. So if we kind of keep that in mind, I'm really hitting you with a number of little phrases, but I'm doing them purposely because, in my travels, what I've noticed, it depends on the country. So if I'm in Africa, which is the most salted of all the developing world today, and that's where so much of the conversation of anti-life and especially the issues of what people want to call in a phrase, reproductive technology, sexual freedom, these phrases, these that are being used, i.e. what that means is promoting contraception, abortion, sterilization. And so we have to, again, know that language. And this is what the people in Africa often tell me. We don't need contraception. We definitely do not need abortion. We don't need any of these evil things. What we need, and then they tell you what they need. And this is the part that I believe, which shows that we have to rise, into this conversation and to be able to recognize what happens, 4,500 miles away in another continent. It affects me. And Mother Teresa of Calcutta, I remember when she stood up at the United Nations and when she gave up many talks in many different political bodies, this beautiful woman stood in the midst and raised the voice of someone in Asia, someone in Africa, someone in Latin America, someone that you and most people and myself may never ever meet, but she spoke on their behalf. So she didn't sing louder. She didn't let the world, in a sense, control the conversation or control the language. She took the language and she took the moment to raise. And this is what we have to do. And you think of Nellie Gray, for example, with the March for Life in Washington, D.C. And we owe Miss Nellie a tremendous amount of gratitude because her fervor and her willingness to do what many people told her didn't need to happen. There was no need for it. But Nellie stood her ground. And anyone who had the privilege of knowing Miss Nellie knew that if you told Nellie no, she was going to do something else. And she did. And what did she do? She created a conversation. and she brought to the stage, and she didn't bring it to any stage, she brought it to Washington, D.C. She put it right on the front stage, right on the front step. And today, we see hundreds of thousands of people, but I will tell you, I participate in marches all over the world. And I will tell you that many of them were founded because of what they see in Washington, D.C. And it does make a difference. And I'm going to tell you another story. This happened not long, just a few years ago, when President Trump put back into effect the Mexico City policy, when he signed that executive order, and he raised, and as some people say, he trumped it. In other words, he raised the conversation, made it stronger. And I will give you an example of how impactful that was. On the day before he signed, in Puerto Rico, for example, there was two abortion facilities, and one was publicly funded. The other was being funded through these funds that were coming from our country and others. And the next day, the one funded by us, in the sense of the US, closed. So it does make a difference when we stand, when we do something that raises the conversation. So this is what I see. Even in the country of Romania, for example, Natalie, I was amazed because one of our affiliates, we call the people we work with affiliates, and we collaborate with them. And this is it's a Catholic priest, and so and being in the rite that he is in, he's a married Catholic priest, and his wife is the actual director. And they started the first march in their little town in Romania. And now on the beautiful feast in the Catholic Church on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, and it's so beautiful, there are over 200, now 300 marches happening all over that country when there was none. So it does show that when we raise our voice, so I think it's very important. So just wanting all of us just to keep in mind, whatever happens to my brother or my sister happens to me. And, keeping in mind that phrase I used by Saul Alinsky. The idea here is whoever controls, the language controls the mind and the heart of a nation. Keep those as our bookends as we keep going through some of these slides. And again, Natalie, if you have a question or something like that, please feel free. Be more than happy as I'm moving along. Otherwise, I'll keep talking.
I am going to jump in here, Father, because I follow the international scene as well in terms of what's happening with abortion, and you see it at the United Nations and the Bill Gates Foundation and all these sorts of things. It's very important for us, I think, to understand how much that affects the developing world. So I don't know that the Canadian scene is very depressing at the moment because Justin Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau's son is Justin Trudeau, and he's just been sending millions of dollars overseas, and very disconcerting. So it is encouraging to hear that when things like this stop, it has an effect.
It does.
So all of it's very, we never actually see the money, we never see the people, but it's good to hear the concrete stories of, that clinic closed because the money coming internationally wasn't there.
Well, what's interesting is, Natalie, and our audience, is that, since when you look at how much money is being poured into this population control mentality around the world, particularly in the developing world. I'm going to give an example. In Africa, 30% of Africans do not have access to clean water, to clean drinking water. Mm-hmm. And yet, in Africa alone, from U.S. aid, from many other countries, what people call the developed world, and we can argue that terminology if we want, about who really is developed and what defines that word developed. But the developed world has spent since over $80 billion just in Africa alone. Now, in a period of 20 years, think about what $80 billion could do. And that's just, that doesn't include the NGOs. It doesn't include private entities like the Gates Foundation or the George Soros Foundation or Rockefeller Foundation. We can go through a litany of foundations that are supporting this anti-life mentality. And, and you look at it and you realize, that but yet 30% of Africans don't have clean water. But you can find contraception, you can find availability through Marie Stopes International, abortion on demand in many countries where it's not even legal. But yet they don't have good roads, they don't have good hospitals, they don't have good education centers, they don't have access to what the real necessities of life are. But you can find pallets of contraception all over the place. And so it really is an assault, and it's a direct assault. And so we see this not only in Africa, we can see this in other developing countries in Asia, from India to the ideas of even parts of Vietnam, into different parts of Indonesia, even into the islands of that you see even toward the Philippines and the archipelago. It really is. So it is. That's why it's a global. And I think for us, especially most of our audience that may be listening are either from Canada or the United States, to really think about, because we would be considered developed nations, and we are the ones spreading the poison on a global scale. That's why if we can take back the conversation and change the conversation and change how we approach these kinds of moral decisions, we can make a positive impact. We could do something quite beautiful and quite impactful in people's lives. And as a result, as I was saying about the marches, people in those countries, I will give you an example. I was in Belarus a few years ago, giving a series of lectures in Minsk, Pinsk, and I was given a lecture at one of the Orthodox academies. And one of the students there came up to me and says, "It's you Americans that are spreading all this poison around the world." So as I mean, for myself as a U.S. citizen, it is it's not just embarrassing. I feel it because I see it. For those that might be familiar, in the city of the great city of Saigon, the former Cardinal Archbishop of that city, of Ho Chi Minh City, who's now in his 90s. So he's quote unquote retired. He's an emeritus. But every day he goes out and sits underneath a tree in the courtyard. He's done it for decades. And when we met him, the beautiful holy man said to us, he says, "Jesus Christ came to save us from sin. You Americans came to teach us how to sin."
Yeah.
So it's humorous, but it's at the same time, it's very, very convicting. So
it is. One other thing I want to bring up, and this is a little on the political side of things, Father, is
Sure.
how important it is for us to understand that politically speaking, I know from speaking to different people that are involved with different delegations to the United Nations, that when you have a pro-life or a sympathetic prime minister who's sympathetic to the abortion issue, or for example with President Trump, somebody who's overtly pro-life, it completely changes the game entirely insofar as the delegations getting sent to the United Nations and to these international bodies are totally different people. They're either, if you have, like right now with Justin Trudeau, our delegations going to the United Nations are people that are pro-abortion, pro-contraception, pro all these things that are anti-life and anti-family. And then you have a changeover with the government, and you get somebody in who's more sympathetic to the pro-life cause, and those delegations completely change. And it has a huge impact worldwide.
Well, and I'm hoping our audience is aware of a recent letter that through the UN ambassador on May 18th, and I'm writing about this for my column on Monday, where it was very clear that the United States made its position known to the UN and actually chastened the UN for attempting to use the COVID-19 as a way of promoting more access to these anti-life issues. And you have to commend, this current moment as a US citizen, particularly to see, especially as a pro-lifer, as one that's working in this great cause, to see those with the president, but also those that are part of the cabinet and the team and the people that are surrounding him are really people that we've known for decades now are in a conversation where they can make a difference. And this is a moment of great opportunity. And I am very much excited, and having been able to contribute to some of the conversation by making available materials in situations I see globally, helps bring those things to the table so that they can then take that information. An example would be in Uganda. Uganda has, in a sense of its population, has a young population and some of the largest families that we see in Africa. And yet you will find every anti-life group working on the ground. And I will say, very tragically, this is a transition from the Obama administration into the Trump administration, but even into the Trump administration, where you see USAID, and you will find everywhere you find a USAID sign, you will find all the other entities of anti-life are there. So they're all there. And so when obviously when the US took a different stand, removing some of that funding, it changes the conversation. But I was there giving a presentation to some of the members of Congress, including the Congress president, and it was interesting. Surrounding the entire area were nothing but contraceptive and abortion signs, all around the assembly hall. And I brought that out to them. And the sad thing is, and that's what I mean by having to help people to be more sensitive. Most of them said to me, "What are you talking about?" Because they don't see them. They live in the midst of all of this, and they just don't see it. And it's the same thing that happened in Tanzania. I was given a presentation on the sanctity of marriage between one man and one woman, and so we got on a subject, and one of the professors in the community said, "Well, we don't have that here." And I said, "With all respect, you're incorrect. If you were to drive just 2 kilometers down and back into the city, you will notice at this," and I named the corner, named the street, "you will find the same business I'm talking about." And they were surprised, again, because what happens is so many of these developing cultures and countries, this is a violence against them. So they're not expecting to see them, and they don't believe it will ever happen because they believe that we just won't allow that to be. But it's already there. It's already crept in. It's a new imperialism. It's a new colonialism. It's just taken over in a different way. So it's good. That's why it's good for us, to go back to that opening. Whatever happens to my brother or my sister. So for me, as a citizen in this country, I am very concerned how we as a nation use our finances. How do we use our funding, our taxes, to support various causes? And so it is an interest to me, because I see it firsthand, both the positive, and I can name a number of positive programs that do tremendous work that we want to see continue. But we also see some very damaging things that we want to see discontinued. So it really is a challenge. So we need to wake people up.
Right.
So that's a good point. Thank you, Natalie, very, very much. So what I like to, just continue moving through the slides just very slightly. And that is, this is for our audience, I'm hoping that you remember this little phrase by John Paul II. This was first made when he was visiting Australia. He may have alluded to it a few times in different ways, but I think the first time that he really coined, this phrase, pulling it all together, he talked about, as the family goes, so goes the nation, so goes the world in which we live. And for me, it's back to this: whatever happens to my brother happens to me. So if I think back as a young boy, I grew up in South Louisiana. My dad is a child of 17 children. I come from a very large family, and we raised on a farm. And, we were taught to share things, to be mindful of those around us. And I remember my dad's father, my grandfather, we would dig rows and rows of potatoes and corn and fields of corn and all this. And every year he would say, "I want you to sack a few of those things up, and I want you to bring them." And he named the people we had to bring them to. And as a typical spoiled, teenager, and I would say to him, 100-degree temperatures, humidity, unbelievable. And you're saying, "Well, look, if so-and-so needs some potatoes, have them come dig those potatoes." And inevitably I get slapped behind the head. And today, as a man, and as a man who's grown and still growing, I realize what my grandfather was teaching us. And it really was about being aware of others. And it's something that's so now a part of me. And I get so concerned, in this current moment right now, for example, when we're seeing the situation that's unfolding in many of our cities right now. I mean, and granted, it's filled with many political, social, there's so many layers, but I'm going to peel it down to another layer. And that is, for all of us, is to recognize, what is this saying about us? Whether we're talking about the loss of the life that started this moment and how that life was treated and the disrespect toward that life, and then how now it has unfolded into so many areas where life itself is still threatened. The very thing that many good people wanting to protest and are protesting in a good and respectful way, but some have taken that to another layer and causing harm to people and causing harm to people in a way that even some people have died from it. So, life needs to be protected on every level, and our voices need to voice on every level to protect life, but especially the most vulnerable, starting in the womb, all the way to its natural end. And if we as a people, I like to think about this. So I'm going to use Natalie as an example for our audience, since you've gotten to know her and you know her through seeing her on the screen. So if Natalie were to become the Prime Minister of Canada, or she would become the President of the United States, what kind of legislation, policies would she want to be promoting? What would she want to implement? And we can know this because we know her. We know what she believes. We know what she stands for. And yes, she's fighting a major system filled with many flaws and many difficulties, but she's going to put every effort in to change the conversation. Think if it was Mother Teresa of Calcutta that became the UN president. Think of people who have this kind of influence. This is what we need. So Pope Benedict XVI used to talk about the public sphere, the politic. And so many people are afraid of getting involved in politics. Listen, and it's not for everybody. We know that. But we need people not to run away from it. We need people to run toward it. We need people to get involved in the conversation. We need people to raise their voices, not be changed by it, but to be the salt and to be the leaven within it, to bring a radical change. It's interesting, in the Philippines, and one of my favorite countries to visit. I have been there 14 times, and God willing, I'll be back there in August of this year. And it is a beautiful country of over 100 million people on the archipelago. Over 10 million living abroad. Many of them in Canada, by the way, up in Toronto and up in the areas of Calgary and so many other places along the Canadian border. And I'm amazed, and I say this very respectfully, because I work with civil and church leaders. And matter of fact, I was with the Senate president recently and talking to the Senate president. And I was saying, many leaders in the Philippines believe, well, none of these things will come to our door. Well, they already are there. And let me give you an example. In some of the universities, they're actually teaching some of these isms that we're dealing with as something that is good. So where will the future doctors come from? Where will the future teachers come from? Where are the future legislators coming from? From these very environments. So we're going to think miraculously they're not going to follow what they follow now? No, that's why we have to, in a sense, retake the conversation. So as the family goes, so if we protect the family and we protect all people that make up the family, and we protect the most vulnerable of the family, so from the preborn child all the way to our elderly brothers and sisters, our sick brothers and sisters, and we fight for them and we defend them. So if we do that in the family is what produces these wonderful gifts to go out into the world. And so it's a great phrase of John Paul, because it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. When the family's broken, we see the wounds in our culture. When the family is thriving, we see the beautiful impact in the culture. So it's a beautiful phrase, and one that we all can reflect on more often these days. So
yes, I would add to that, Father, seeing what's happening in the United States, you just wonder the breakdown of the family, how that has contributed to what we're seeing right now, the
absolutely.
fatherlessness,
Yes,
and the high abortion rates in amongst certain groups. and what that does, how soul destroying that is, and how that then has repercussions for the rest of the family.
Absolutely.
So
It's
definitely, it's very powerful. As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the world.
absolutely, absolutely. And the way to heal that is, it's in a sense, is how do we reteach? John Paul, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, that so many people of different religious backgrounds and are familiar with, because it really is the if you want to, it's just the text of the conversation. And in paragraph 5, he actually says we have to reteach people how to love, how to respect, how to defend, and how to serve life. When you have to reteach something, and as a teacher, when I have to reteach something, that means something's been lost. So if I'm reteaching it, it means someone doesn't understand. They don't know the language. They don't know what the vocabulary is. You have to reteach it. And think for a moment with me, and I think all of us, if, in this little phrase, if every life is not protected, then no life is protected. If if every life is not protected, no life is protected. Because look what's going on right now and very sadly, in the situation. There are some have no regard for anyone's life, no one's life. And so look at the indiscriminate way that the preborn child is treated. Look in Iceland, that recently, broadcast to the world that they had solved the issue of those with Down syndrome. No, they haven't. What they've done is murdered, over 90%, almost 95%, it depends on what statistic you look at, of those diagnosed with Down syndrome. So, and people, they're celebrating this. Look what happened in Ireland recently with the legalization of the issue of abortion, or of same-sex issue. And you look at this, and this is an interesting thing that, again, history is so important. It's great. We need to read. We so desperately need to read. When John Paul visited Ireland for the first time, Natalie, he said to the people who would have been people in my age bracket, or maybe a little older, slightly older, and they were the young people then. And he said to them, the future of Ireland is in your hands. Now, that generation would have given birth to me, my generation, and now, and younger, a little younger than me. And these were the people in the streets celebrating what they had now just legally made happen. And so it's a very frightening thing to see that there are people who really believe that choosing to kill an innocent child is something that's freeing, and it's not freeing at all. It's a false sense of freedom. And so when people say that that no one's hurt, of course someone's hurt. The baby is murdered, and the mother's life is forever changed. And so there are two people hurt there. One whose life will never be ever given back, and one whose life is forever changed. So this is why this is so important for us to realize how we enter into this conversation. So it's some of our audience might be a little familiar with Cardinal Robert Sarah. I'm not going to read the whole quote, but this is indeed something for all of us to be thinking about. And I want to use the one that I boxed at the very bottom. Is the supernatural is swallowed up in the desert of the natural. So we think that our world is going to be transformed. So as a Christian, for me as a Christian, to realize that I could be a very intelligent, I can be a very gifted, I can be a very skilled individual. And all those things are beautiful and wonderful. But if I think that those skills by themselves, what he calls multiplying human efforts, believing that the methods and strategies have any efficacy in themselves, he reminds us that our work will be in vain. So what the Cardinal is doing is reminding us where that seed finds its nourishment. It's in Christ. It's in the Lord. It's where our strength originates. It's where we find meaning and purpose. And as the Psalm says, unless the Lord builds the house, in vain do the builders labor. But our world, let's be honest, the supernatural has been swallowed up in this world. So why do I bring this up? Because how do we reteach a people who are living in purely secular definitions of life, secular mentalities, very, very earthy, if you will, in all their way of governing? It's emotion, it's relativism, moral certitude has been thrown out the window. Basically, as we know, I could be holding up, and I'll do this, I'll hold up a book and say it's a banana. And you say, no, it's not a banana. Well, who are you to tell me it's not a banana? I believe it's a banana. And because I believe it's a banana, it's a banana. Whether you can prove to me scientifically doesn't matter. I believe it's a banana. This is part of our problem today. And that I remember standing in front of an abortion facility in prayer in California, in Sacramento. And I remember one of the agents from the abortion facility came out and was very angry that I was standing there and said to me, you know, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm doing what everybody else does here. I'm quietly, praying and standing here in solidarity with all the little boys and girls who today are going to lose their life in your hands and the hands of those who work in this facility, in this murderous place. And she says, oh, we don't know when human life begins. Oh, and I said, and so finally, when I saw her name tag, I realized who she was, and I called her by name, and I said to her, oh, now we both know, and especially yourself, who holds, and I named the degrees because I was familiar with when I realized the name, and I said, you and I both know what you just said is not scientifically true, and you know that. And the conversation ended. See, we have to be willing to realize that, you know, they want me to be swallowed up in their vocabulary. They want me to be swallowed up in where they are. We have to be counter-cultural. We have to set a different tone. And this is the thing we got to keep doing by raising our voices and getting involved, you know, educating people. This is something Human Life International does and has done throughout its apostolate, is education. The more that we help people to understand, the more articulate and the stronger they are and capable of entering into that conversation. This is a wonderful thing, and I'm going to pass through this one real quick because we have a few more to go, and our time is flying by too quickly. We could have spent, Natalie, 4 or 5 hours together. And so, but, you know, Pope Francis, you know, talks about this. He says, what counts is to be permeated by the love of Christ. And this is something that really stands out to me. And in a sense of, is that working with people around the world, and you know, and being in various cultures, and I have been in countries where the Muslim faith is the dominant practiced faith, and I have been in countries where Catholicism is the dominant faith. I've been in countries where it's Anglican, it's Orthodox. I've been in places where Judaism is the stronger and dominant. And so we have to look at this. Is the idea here is what permeates my life? What fills it? What is it that governs my choices, my decisions, my attitude, my behavior, my demeanor? What is it? You know, and if it's not, in this case as a Christian, if it's not Christ himself, then what else is the center of my life? And so if I'm of Jewish faith, and so if Yahweh, if he is not the true center, if God is not the center, then what is the center? You know, and all of us can look out in the world and see that. We can see, you know, we cannot serve two masters. And so part of this is why I keep bringing this to bear in this moment is this for me is the fundamentals, because it allows us to have a conversation on the natural law. It allows us, for example, I was recently in India, and I was asked a question, I was asked to give a presentation on the natural law to students studying the natural law, and not to have any of the conversation on regarding the dignity of human life based in any of Christian or religious conversation. That wasn't hard to do, not hard at all. Why? Because if we're knowledgeable of what the natural law is, and we're knowledgeable how to articulate that natural law, then we can have a conversation which ultimately will lead people to what we're already talking about. So it's something that our audience, I know, may be thinking, God, I don't know where to start studying. Where do I look all this up? Well, the most important part is to seek that knowledge, and to go to organizations like our own that's represented here and learn and read. And you know, just to let you know from my own self, I mean, and this is nothing, I'm not bragging by any means, but you know, I continue to study, and I'm actually working right now on another degree, you know, to further my own knowledge, so that I can be a sharper instrument in this conversation. So no matter how old we are, no matter what our state in life, we never stop learning. And I think it's so important. So when I read this from Pope Francis, I wasn't just thinking from the Christian as the literalness of what he said. I was thinking, God, what permeates my life, and what fills it? And I cannot imagine right now in my journey doing anything other than what I'm doing. This to me is really the most important work. This is what I mean. And I think of the wonderful phrase of Henry Hyde. I'm hoping that many of our audience might know the late representative, a great pro-life warrior. And there was a great quote of his, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to give all of it. But basically, it was him looking out toward the end of his life and realizing, like me, far from perfect, but looking out toward the end. And he comes to that moment when he stands before that judgment seat. And basically, what he's reflecting on is how unworthy, how ill-prepared I may be to stand in that moment. But the voices of those for whom I defended will be those voices that will rise in the back and say, have mercy on him, for he loved us much. That to me is something, and I say this to our audience, and this to me is something from myself that doesn't excuse me, but it actually brings me a great peace, is every day I must wake up to fight that fight. Every day. Every day. I may not ever see the fruit of what I want to happen, but I'm going to get up every day nonetheless and fight that fight. And that is something for all of us. We need to be encouraged. We need to be encourage each other. We need to be able to help each other to know what to do. And I often think of a carpenter's toolkit. In there's a hammer, could be a wrench, a screwdriver, many things. But every one of those tools has a purpose. And Natalie might be the hammer. I might be the screwdriver. But there's a purpose for each one of them. And the idea here is I don't go try to drive a nail with a screwdriver. All right. So what I mean simply is this: every one of us that's here tonight, everyone listening tonight is a tool. Every one of us has skills. Every one of us has abilities. Every one of us has a voice. Every one of us has an ability to bring to the conversation. Our task is to figure out what skill that is and actualize it. So that's very, very important. So that's something to keep in mind.
That's right. I would say too, Father, that the pro-life issue itself is a great jumping off point.
Right.
Because it's an easy segue into some very deep philosophical questions. Great conversation when you're on the airplane.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I guess perhaps for you and I don't know if you've had this often where somebody says, so what do you do? And it leads into some very, very interesting, deep, soul-searching questions. And at
39,000 feet.
That's right.
No, I've had it. I was on my way to Mexico, Natalie, and I think it's a great, thank you for interjecting that. I think it's a great story, and for all of us who are in this apostolic work. And I was on my way to Mexico City for some seminars, and I was in Dulles Airport. I live in Virginia, where Human Life International is located, the main office. And so I'm in Dulles Airport, and we're in the lobby waiting in the gate. And they announced we're going to be a little late. And so I sit down, and so this young lady sits beside me. And what you just said, Natalie, very true. She says, Father, where are you from? What do you do? Where are you going? Why are you going to Mexico? And so forth. And so I told her what I did, and she immediately said, I think abortion is a wonderful thing, and I think it should be promoted more so. And she started telling me all these things. And so we were delayed about 5 hours. And for the next 4 hours, we sat in that gate and we talked. And she was extremely open. I will tell you, she stated her position. She expressed herself, and she was somewhat articulate about some of the things in the sense of knowledge. And so we talked. And to show you how God has a great sense of humor, so they announced that we're going to board. And so my number was called. So I went on board, and a little while I see her coming down the aisle. And the next thing I know, she's looking for her seat, which is next to me. And so for the next 4.5 hours, we have another conversation. And when she got off the plane, before leaving, she said to me, I can't tell you that you've changed my mind, but you've given me a tremendous amount to think about. And I want to thank you, she said, for not being judgmental, but being willing to listen, and at the same time being convicted and telling me what you believe. And she says, and I will take that to heart. You never know what happened after that. It's all we can do is go back to planting that seed. So you're absolutely right, Natalie. I mean, sometimes at 39,000 feet, and sometimes you have a captive audience, or they are you're their captive audience. So it could be a joy or a difficulty.
That's right.
But just back to Pope Francis just for a second. He says, that the purpose of evangelization belongs to all of us, and I think it's such a good thing for us to think about. And here is where I'm not sure if you can actually see the cursor, but I just want to focus in on this phrase right here: the art of living. What Pope Benedict's talking about, my friends, is that people have lost a sense of good from bad, a sense of right from wrong, what is beauty versus what is grotesque. People have lost the art of living, and the art of living that really is personified, as he says, as Christians that come to us from the gospel. And that's what's been lost. And I will say, I mean, think about what I began earlier when I quoted Saul Alinsky's phrase: he who controls the language controls the mind and the heart of a nation. So look at the word pre-embryo. Look at how people have taken a phrase and convinced others that this is just a ball of cells, or this is a disconnected, a tissue, or whatever it may be. But think about, now take that further out, pull that out, that same mindset. How would they treat a person who has dementia? How would they treat a person who has had a tragic accident and no longer has the cognitive ability to function? What do we do? Because if I can treat the preborn baby, who is a living human organism from the moment of conception, the moment of fertilization, all right? If I can do this to this preborn child, what stops me from doing that to someone else who has the same definition? Well, if you listen to people like Peter Singer, our audience may or may not be familiar with him, you can look him up. He would see no difference between the two, all right? How would you treat someone with Downs? Matter of fact, Peter would believe that you can be able to, if a child, doesn't have any of these abilities by even into adolescence, well, you just be rid of them, So think of the basically the throwaway mentality. How in the world did we get here? How in the world did we end up in this position? Where did it all start? And of course, all of this originates in the assault on the inalienable and inviolable dignity of the human person. If we don't know who the human person is, all these violent things occur. I can treat Natalie because a certain way, and I can turn around and treat my mother a different way. And, I can treat my mother with great respect because she's my mom, and Natalie because I don't know her. Well, don't worry about her life. But you see what the problem with that is? That's arbitrary. And this is where the language of our day is that. It really is an arbitrary. It's a mentality that's extremely dangerous. And we see this in how people treat people of color, how people treat the elderly, how people treat the handicapped, how people treat various groups of people, and this is the language that has to change. So we have to go back to reteach that art of living in a sense of where this all begins. So I'm going to go through just a couple more slides because our time, I know, is creeping, and Miss Natalie's in charge of that clock. So
yes,
she's
I
going to
am,
keep us on
and I
target.
just wanted to jump in, Father. If people have questions, please feel free to type in questions either into the Q&A or the chat at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions for Father, we're coming sort of close to the end of his talk here, but again, please certainly put out questions. Go ahead, Father.
Oh, thank you very, very much. And this is all taken for the next few parts, and I'm going to go through them quickly so that we just kind of at least familiarize ourselves with them. This is taken from paragraph 96 of the Gospel of Life. And what John Paul says is that first step in that culture of life is a transformation of consciences. So this is what we've been talking about, all right? How do we transform how people think, language they use, behavior, attitude? Very, very important. And he goes on, he says, in order to make the transformation occur, we have to develop a deep critical sense. So let's be honest, most people don't think that abortion is no problem. They have no problem with this. They have no problem with some of the things we've been talking about. We have to develop that sense that there's something serious here. We know it, I know it, you know it, but so many people don't know it. And some of them are in our own families. Some of them are our own friends, our own community, people who even sit in the pews with us in our own churches. All right. So we have to develop a critical sense. We have to mobilize consciences, which means we have to activate them. We got to really get in there and pull people together. So an example of that is, think of programs like 40 Days that goes out and prays at certain periods of the year. How many people are out in front of abortion facilities every day throughout the year, but they stand alone? 5 people, 4 people, 6 people, 10 people. Where are the rest of them? Where are all the other people? Mobilize. Why aren't people more concerned what's happened with the COVID-19 with regard to the elderly and the percentage of elderly that have died as a consequence of being treated like rubbish? You know, where is this? So we have to be united in an ethical effort, a truth, all right? So remember, this is not a banana, all right? It will never be a banana, all right? So we have to be united in a truth. And what is truth, all right? And so we have to activate that great campaign. So what we're doing tonight, and I want to thank Natalie and you know, and LifeCanada for putting this together, because this is a golden moment, you know, to activate people's minds. And I thank all of you tonight who joined in and who are listening. I appreciate your patience. And this is a kind of a very unique thing that we're all trying to do in this moment of time. But it shows that we're together. So tonight, all of us that are listening are together. We're together in this. But now we need to take that to others. We need to develop, mobilize, be united, activate, and together. If we can memorize that and have nightmares about those words, that's a great thing.
Father, I have a very good question. I don't know if this is quite the place for it, but like right now, but take it. It says, what is your recommended response to who am I to judge in respect to abortion, euthanasia, same-sex marriage, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure, sure. If we go back to that same phrase, remember, you know, the passage of Cain and Abel. It's a great way for us to really reflect when the question is, you know, where is your brother? And I think that, you know, that our Lord, and as we know, we are a people of relationship. We belong to community. And as a people of community, we also have what guides us is a moral truth, a judgment that each of us knows, written within our own hearts, that is something that is good. So if we look at the family, for example, we know that that man and woman are complementary. We can look at the human body purely from a natural biological point and realize that man is complementary to woman, woman is complementary to man, and that the two, when becoming one flesh, bring together what they offer as of their unity, which helps engender the potentiality of a child. Two people of the same sex cannot do that. And so that's just something biological that we can explain. And so we need to recognize that this is part of a community. This is part of relationship to each other. And when someone chooses, no, I can't, I'm not going to force them. I'm not going to belittle them. I'm not going to speak ill of them. But at the same time, we always have had accepted behavior and moral decisions within our cultures that have governed us for millennia. And these, especially in a Judeo-Christian culture, you know, we have been very clear in these principles, but what we've seen, you know, as the cultures have become more secularized and the ideologies of secularism, especially since the time, you know, of Descartes and Hume and many philosophers, we've seen a change in how people think. And this is now filtered all the way down to the day. So when someone says, well, you know, who are you to judge, or who are you to say anything? Who are you to be involved? Well, I take the same principle. If I'm on the side of a street and you're on the side of a street and you decide to walk out into the street and there's a car coming, do I just let you walk in front of the car? No, because I'm concerned about you and I care about you and I'm concerned about your well-being. I intervene. This is something that we have to see, that there is a necessity of intervention. And the judgment is not the judgment upon my care, it's actually because I care. And this is part of the conversation that we need to reinstill within people. We know this in our families. You know, an example of that, you know, I have family members who, when I'm home and they want to visit, they will often tell me, okay, today we're not going to talk about A, B, C, D, or E. And what's the first thing we're going to talk about? A, B, C, D, E. It's inevitable. Why? Because they want to know, and they're searching. And in many cases, my friends, it's because no one's really told them. No one's ever had a conversation. So don't be afraid, and don't get caught in that trap of who are you? You know, if you think about what happened with Cain and Abel, if you think about what was being taught in that moment, it's because we belong to a community. The human person is communal. The human person is relational, all right? We don't live in isolation, and we don't practice isolationism or individualism, for that matter.
At least we don't want to, even
right.
though we're forced to.
Oh, right now in quarantine, yes. But look what we're doing.
Yes.
We're all in a virtual chat. We don't want to be alone. No, we want to be together.
Right.
And so
I would say that perhaps, Father, the judging is for you. You can make a judgment not about someone's character, but for their good. Right. About what you're going to do for their good.
Even our Lord says, judge. I mean, you judge it by its fruit. So That's I mean, for anyone that says don't judge, it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. You know, every day we make judgments. Some are simple, some are very, very dire. We make judgments every day.
Right. And we're not judging, we're not talking about judging the character of the person or the intentions of the person necessarily. We're talking about judging how we can intervene and help. I've got a couple of questions here that are quite interesting. Somebody just wants to go back and quickly check the last slide that you had, Father. If you can just jump back to the last slide there. And then there's some interesting questions here. How do you recommend to engage with people who know abortion is destructive and still support it?
Well, I think the question I often ask in a situation like that,
other than praying for them,
is why? What is it within them that doesn't, in a sense, why are so instead of someone saying for me, for example, why are you so concerned? My turnaround is, why are you not concerned? Help me to understand what it is that doesn't motivate you to see that there's something really wrong here. And just take out the religious tone. Just take it out of the conversation, because you don't have to have it, is that if I randomly go around and arbitrarily take the life of people that I just don't like, I would be held accountable for such an act. I cannot do that. We as a society have said, this is unacceptable. What's tragic is that we have justified an act of murder of an innocent human being in the womb that has no voice, no defense mechanism, except to be completely dependent upon its mother to be able to defend its life. So yes, we need to pull people into the conversation. And the way that I do that, when someone says to me in an airport, for example, well, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm not sure I can do that. My question is, why? Why can't you do that? And that's an opportunity for conversation. So it's not a confrontational, negative confrontation. Sometimes it's a person who really does believe that abortion's wrong, but no one's ever challenged them to say, what are you doing about it then? If you believe it's wrong, then do something. So that's what gets me all upset when people in our public sphere try to get up and tell people, well, I personally don't believe, but. The moment you hear that word but, they don't believe that, what they just said. They don't. Because if you did believe that this is a crime, then you would do so. That's why I'm using the language purposely. I'm using crime, I use violence, and I use murder. I don't fairy tale the conversation, because as we know, and this is important, for the person to ask the question, as it helps us all to grow in our vocabulary, what did we learn? Just because it's a law, if it's an unjust law, all right? It doesn't mean it has to be followed. We shouldn't follow it. So we need to look at this. And so my task in these moments is how do I, because look, the people I speak to around the world don't necessarily agree with me. Many of the people I deal with at times are people who don't share what we in this audience today believe. So my task is to prick their conscience. My task is to provoke them to think a lot deeper about this, and really to expose what happens when indifference reigns and when an arbitrary position holds. The danger of that.
Right.
I hope that helps.
Yes, I'm sure. There is another question that's on climate change, and I'm going to let you get to the end of your slides, and then we'll work with that one.
Okay, that's fine. So what we'll do is we're just going to move a little along. And Natalie, would you mind giving me kind of a little clock, if you don't mind, because I don't have a clock up here?
Yes, I would say we've got about 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to skip through this a little bit and just kind of move our way through. So this is what we've been talking about. So when you look at an individual freedom, so this is a definition of a culture of death, is distorted to the point where it becomes an enemy of life and therefore of freedom. So if it's my body, my rights, my choice, my decision, all these things, this so-called individual freedom is a distorted freedom. And as a consequence, it therefore is not freedom at all. It's not a freedom because something else is governing my life. It's governing my thought. It's governing my position. And think about the arbitrary position of this. So my freedom now is based upon the destruction of this life. My freedom is based upon the abuse of or exploiting you. So think about what's going on in Africa, for example, where so many of the natural resources that are being exploited from the African nations. And why? So that we in our first world can have all the luxuries that we want. So we're exploiting people in order for us to have. So all we got to do is look at who is the #1 consumer of aluminum, copper, nickel. You start asking these questions. Well, where are all these things coming from? Well, if you follow the money trail, you find out where they are. And you find out that most of this is in developing nations. So we're exploiting. So the idea here is this. So my right, freedom, doesn't give me the right to exploit Natalie. It doesn't, there's no such thing as a freedom that does that. That's part of the culture of death, a loss of the sense of the sacred. So if I don't look at Natalie and all of you who are with me tonight as sacred beings, if I don't see that, then what are you? Then you're something I can use. You're something I can exploit. And we see this in the whole sexual revolution. We see this all in the exploitation of human sexuality. We see this in the rise of addictions to pornography. We see this in human trafficking. We see this in sex trafficking. We see this in the abuse of people on every level of human existence. So all of this begins because I don't recognize that Natalie and all of you with me and myself are sacred beings. We are people with inalienable, inherent dignity, which means that doesn't come from the state. It doesn't come from the prime minister. It doesn't come from the Congress. This is innate. It's part of me, and it originates from me. All of my freedoms originate from my dignity and my liberties, which is a different phrase in a sense of what maybe my government might, I drive a car. That's a liberty, all right? That's not a freedom, all right? It's a liberty. All right, I can go to the grocery store in my country. Well, if you go into Venezuela, you can't go to the store. All right, now some of that could be pertained to human dignity, but there are liberties and freedoms. We don't have time to get into that tonight, but very, very important to see that. And so also, but the human being wishing to be, this is a very important thing here, the sole architect of their natural destiny. That's a very, very dangerous language. And I'll give you an example. I was in the Philippines recently, and I was asked to give a presentation to a body of 3,000 people, and this was all about the sacredness of marriage between one man and one woman. Well, little did I know that it was going to be a hotbed of issue, and part of it is that people had infiltrated into the group and wanted to promote the whole LGBT issue. And as a consequence, and transgender issues and all these things that are there. And so what happens is this young woman stands up and says, I am the sole architect of my life. Really? And so this is the danger. No, you're not the sole architect of your life. You did not call your life into existence. And the idea here is that you are not some individual that is completely separated from the human family. You are not just isolated unto yourself, like an island unto yourself. All this language is a dangerous, dangerous thing. And what do we see? What does it produce? Pro-choice, pro-death, all the things that we're seeing. So this is a very important thing. It's a disconnect from the natural moral law. An example of this is that each of us here, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to use Natalie because Natalie's on my screen. So Natalie's the one I see, my friends. So I wish I saw more of you because I can use your names. But let's say that you had Natalie, Bob, and Steve. So I tell Natalie, Bob, and Steve, here Natalie is a 1 pound chocolate bar. And let's say that Natalie, Bob, and Steve are each 3 years old. So Natalie gets a 1 pound chocolate bar. I give Bob a 2 pound chocolate bar, and I give Steve a 3 pound chocolate bar. What do you think Natalie is going to say? They don't know philosophy. They don't know natural law in a sense of how to articulate it. But what Natalie knows, there is an injustice here. Why did Steve get a 3 pound chocolate bar and I only get a 1 pound chocolate bar? So you can understand the natural law and just natural moral law simply by looking at injustice and looking at why is that an injustice. It has nothing to do with the chocolate bar, all right? And I can say, well, I just liked Steve better than I like Natalie. Why? Because that's what the kid is going to ask you. Why? And those of you who have children and grandchildren, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Why did he get more than me? Why did this happen? Why do I have to go to bed earlier? You hear it. There's something, because it's written. The law is written upon us. It's written within our very being. And to know that, and so to arbitrarily treat this is a denial of that natural law. And so that's a very, very a good thing for us to think about. Again, I wish we had many more time together. But the culture of life means respect for nature, which kind of goes to, as the popes have been saying, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, whether we're talking about issues of our environment around us, of course, but the pinnacle of creation is the human person. The person is the summit of that creation. And so when we look at the culture of life, we're talking about respect for the nature and the protection of God's work of creation. In a special way, it means respect for human life from the first moment of conception until its natural end. This is what it means to be a culture of life. And just, because I know time is getting precious here, but to the person that posed the question with regard, to the climate, I don't know what the question was, but I'm going to give it a story because it might help. And that was this. In the Philippines, there was a mayor, a good friend of mine that I've gotten to know in these last now 10 years. And when she attended one of our conferences back in 2012, she was so moved that she declared the city a pro-life city. And as a consequence, she started also working within the culture and the environment around, making sure that people had clean water, that they weren't pouring, sewage and dirt into their own waterways. Why? Because that's what they drink from. That's what they get their produce from, the shrimp, the crabs, the fish. So she's looking at the human person. That is the starting point, and saying, how do we protect the human person? Well, we also protect the human person by not only protecting their physical, spiritual lives, but we also protect what impacts that person and what that person needs. So if you come with me into underdeveloped parts of the world and you see how people live, and you look at this and you say, this is an injustice. It's an assault on the human person. How could they not have clean water? How could they not have clean ways of dealing with their sewage? How could they not have sanitation? How could they not have hospitals? How could they not have this? Why are they not having these things? So when you look at how people exploit the resources of the world, it has nothing to do, quote, with, from our perspective, in the sense of, we're not talking about an anti-population. That's how they approach it. They think, we got too many people because we want all these resources. No, we start with the human person as the very pinnacle of our conversation. And then we have a conversation about how, because of the human person, we deal with the elements of human life that impact each of us as part of this community. So that's a good way to look at that. And so just A few more slides, and I appreciate people's patience. So how do we do this new evangelization? So we heard about that transformation, how we have to, from the point of development, of raising people's consciences and being united. So here's another part. We have to deepen our own faith. So to all of us tonight who are here, no matter what our faith tradition, where we're coming from, we really have to deepen our religious root. We have to deepen our lives as people who seek what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful and just, the transcendentals. We have to really seek out these. We also have to be willing to go forth. So we have to go forth. In this situation, I'm talking about the gospel, but we can talk about go forth and proclaim the truth about human life, the human person. Go out and proclaim the beauty of the sanctity of marriage between one man and one woman. Be able to go out. And to be evangelized means to go forth and evangelize. So what we've done tonight, basically, and I want to again thank Natalie and LifeCanada, because what you've done tonight by providing this platform is not just for us to come here and listen. All right, we got to do something with this now. We got to get off of our couches once all these things open up and say, especially for those of you that maybe already are pro-life leaders working in your own way, be thinking, what can I do more? What else should I be doing? There's never enough. All right. The other thing is that maybe those who have come to our conversation tonight, and I really thank you for taking time to be here, and that is, what are you going to do now? My task, hopefully, has been to invigorate you, to empower you, to say there's so much. And all we've done now in these 45, 50 minutes is just a little bitty sliver of the conversation. There's so much more. But my hope is that each of us here will recognize what's before us. And, not all of you may be like Natalie or myself, given opportunity to serve like we're serving. But, all of us come to this table, all of us. So we have to be willing to even be evangelized in order to evangelize. We have to repropose this truth to others. We have to repropose it to people who have never heard it. All right. And we have to repropose it even to the people who we think heard that news. An example would be, I got a phone call before coming online tonight from some friends whose one of their family members has taken a turn toward the culture of death. And it pains their heart to watch this happen. So we have to also repropose this to the very people we think really believe with us. And we have to do this. And, look, I've seen this as a priest. I get up and preach on some of these issues, and I've had people walk out. I've gotten some of the nastiest letters you've ever seen. I still get nasty letters. Matter of fact, I sat down with my assistant and went through a litany of letters. Some were beautiful, some were not so good. They don't like what we're saying. All right. So, but the idea here is we got to keep teaching. I don't hold it against people. We have to teach. And finally, this. Oh, sorry, one more this way is live it vibrantly. And that's the way I think would be good for us to conclude, is living everyday moments of our lives with faith, hope, and love in a most effective way, and to share it with others. This witness is what is needed for reaching our families, friends, neighbors, colleagues, in order to transform the culture. And I put the two circles overlapping because they really speak the same language. It's about vibrancy. It's about really going out and letting other people know the good news. So that is my challenge to us tonight, is to really take what we know already, keep learning, keep growing, and then take it out. Go out, be patient, be gentle. And my final thought, the woman at the well. It's one of my most passages that I reflect on so often. I am not the Lord Jesus. Don't pretend to be the Lord Jesus. And what our Lord was able to do in that moment, however long that moment was, for me, it might take me my lifetime to reach that one person. But I'm going to try my best. It may take a minute. It may take 5 minutes. But I've learned from my Lord to be patient, to be firm, to always be truthful. And when the conversation opens, go a little further. As it opens, a little further. Patiently, gently, but always with the intention and determination to help that soul to see.
Very nice, Father. Thank you very much. Let's deal with these. We've got two little questions here. One's rather interesting, and then we'll have a quick commercial break, and then we will finish. And this is, he says, I realize the program is about the sacredness of life with respect to the unborn. And also those who, are elderly or have lost mental function and so on and so forth. But he says, I just want to ask if you believe that climate change also challenges the sacredness and dignity of life.
Right.
And he's saying, I'm thinking of the effects of climate change on its victims. Yeah. By extension, all human life is sacred. And, so the effects of climate change he's worried about. What's your answer there, Father?
Yeah, as I said earlier, so when we look at, of course, it's terminology, not so much the person that's asking the question, but so many people use the terms of whether we're talking about changes within our environment, the situations that we're seeing on some global issues. But the good thing here is I'm going to put that aside in the sense of talking about the science, because we don't have the time for that. But what I would say is, I repeat what I said earlier. What happens around me affects me. So the environment, the situation around me. So in other words, if I go out and poison someone's field, that affects that person's ability to feed their family, to care for their family. Maybe that was a community garden to feed the neighborhood. It has an impact. So there are things that we can do as humans that do impact the environment around us. And we need to be very mindful of that and be more cognitive of being a good steward. The church has taught this for centuries. And it's so important to see that I must be a steward, not only of my own life and what revolves around me, but I need to be concerned about how that impacts my brothers and sisters too. So it's a very, very good conversation. And there are many beautiful teachings on that. I would direct them, to many of the statements of the church on this, and to help guide them in what's being said and talked about. It's a good question, though. I get it quite often.
Good. And one last question, and I think this is from somebody. He's saying there's a lot of impressive hands-on crusaders in the Protestant churches.
Yes.
And he talks about Stephen Crowder, Jeff Durbin, Apologia Church. Should the Catholic Church be doing the same thing? I think we are. I mean, I think this is an area where we sort of stand shoulder to shoulder as Catholics and Protestants. It really is a unifying thing. I know on my board of directors, for example, we have Protestants and Catholics working together. So I do think.
I think the March for Life gives a good example of that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Apologia Church, but perhaps you know of it, Father.
I've heard the title. I'm just not sure I would be responding to the same one I'm actually thinking about. But I leave this as an example. In Belarus, much of the pro-life work are coming from the Orthodox. And it's a beautiful way of partnering with our brothers and sisters. And most of the work I was doing while there was within that community. I was really, really impressed and grateful for especially what they were doing in the city of Pinsk and Minsk. Very beautiful, very beautiful. No, this is something we share in common, Natalie. Like you said, 100%. This is shoulder to shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, well, I'm going to cut to our if you could just stop sharing your screen, Father. Thank you.
Yes,
there you are. And I'm going to just cut to our little commercial break. And everyone just stay right where you are. And I'm just going to pop this up. Oh, I need to share my screen quickly. This is a little bit about the work of LifeCanada.
Welcome to LifeCanada. We are Canada's national educational organization, assisting our member groups to effectively reach out to their communities. LifeCanada educates, trains, and strengthens hundreds of dedicated pro-lifers across Canada. LifeCanada is well known for its national polling. For years, we have surveyed the public on the issues of abortion and euthanasia. We have been an invaluable source for tracking popular opinion, and we have built a demographic profile of the Canadian population. Our 2019 anniversary poll marked the 50 years since abortion was legalized. We found that only 8% of Canadians support late-term abortions, while in Canada, no law exists to restrict abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. Only 2% of Canadians support abortions that target girls. In Canada, however, sex selection abortions are not illegal. Among our many activities are our national conferences. These fantastic educational conferences unite and educate the whole pro-life community. They are often a great catalyst for even more pro-life initiatives nationwide. Since 2000, LifeCanada has provided multimedia campaigns to our member groups that help them educate their communities. In 2019, we helped to organize the Missing Project that consisted of 50 individual interviews and a full-length documentary on the subject of abortion. Individuals across Canada were interviewed and were able to share with the public just how much abortion has made an impact on their lives. LifeCanada provides programming to our groups that stimulate their growth and enrichment. Our Dying Healed program is a vital volunteer recruitment and training program. Since its launch in 2017, we have trained over 1,000 volunteers, giving people confidence in end-of-life issues and helping them serve the lonely, ill, and dying. Our training program is in more than 25 communities, bringing solid end-of-life formation to volunteers. LifeCanada has a huge social media presence through our Facebook page, reaching tens of thousands of people every week. In order for LifeCanada to continue to help shape the culture, we need your help. At our last annual gala event in Vancouver, BC, we raised over $100,000. We need to continue changing hearts and minds, and so we ask for financial support. Monthly donations are especially important to us. Our national conferences are costly, but $100 will allow a young person to attend, whose first exposure to the pro-life movement could be through these conferences. $200 will supply our Outstanding Reflections magazine to 10 member groups for 1 year. $300 will enable the Dying Healed program to be run in a community near you. Whatever you can give, we are truly grateful. Please go to www.lifecanada.org/pledge to make a pledge today. When you make a pledge and donate at www.lifecanada.org/pledge, you will receive a PDF of our new beautiful magazine on adoption. Thank you for your support of LifeCanada.
Great. So I just want to say thank you to everyone here. Please support the work of LifeCanada. We are especially in need at this time, mostly because of various things that have been canceled due to the COVID situation. Father, I'm sure you have this issue as well, our gala dinner and different things. So if everybody here today gave $10, that would make an impact, and it would help us enormously. So it was www.lifecanada.org/org. Let me, I can put it up. I just want to thank you, Father, for joining us this evening. It was wonderful to hear your words, and very grateful for the work that you do, and very grateful for Human Life International. So here's
It's been a great blessing for me as well.
Yes. So this is the little slide here has the information. So thank you to all who've attended. Thank you, Father. And till we meet again.
Thank you, and God bless.
God bless.